Dad, just tell me honestly, if you really truly believe that you are the direct connection and the only person on the planet that has that direct connection, what does the sound of God's voice sound like? I am the fourth oldest grandchild out of the 350. We shared bedrooms. I've never had my own bedroom, never had my own bed. Quite often I'd find myself sleeping on the floor. So my options were continue that or get married. My dad says, when somebody like this bothers with somebody like you, and this is how you repay him, you owe him an apology. And so my dad forced me to apologize to him, stood there and watched me apologize to him. Then we were engaged 6 months later and married 6 months later.
Oh my gosh.
I was, 8 days into 17. He was 25 when I got married. I got pregnant immediately because there's no contraceptive allowed. I got morning sickness and I was really, really sick. And so he immediately started looking for wife number 2. And that was really hard to go through, being so young. And he already had his eyes set on someone. I had no voice in that situation. This is what's going to happen. And the prophet already wanted this to happen. My dad was like, yeah, let's do this. I was going to be that gold shining star that showed that my dad had raised his children right, and that I was going to be the first one in polygamy. I went through a crisis of faith because I was one of the oldest children. When he just became the prophet about 3 years ago, I never thought I'd publicly speak out. That's when a lot of my siblings started to publicly speak out because they're like, wait a second, this man has literally abused us our entire life. How's he the mouthpiece for God on the planet now?
Mine is the only voice.
Wow. What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast apps and you would prefer to see our faces and join in on the conversation, go to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. We do so many other videos over here too, guys. I know sometimes we post the lives on the audio platforms, but we have a lot going on over here on YouTube. Community posts, we engage the audience, we want to hear your suggestions, so we take polls, and it's just a really fun place to be. The community over here is incredible because of all those words of encouragement that you leave for our guests. It means so much to them. It boosts the algorithm. It's truly inspiring to see everyone else's stories in the comments as well. So thank you guys for being here today. So today's guest, she reached out to us through our Jot form. If you're ever interested in coming on the show, we do have a form in our About section, a link that you can click on and tell us your story. So she came from the AUB, which is a polygamous offshoot of the mainstream Mormon church. We've only covered it, I want to say, once, maybe twice. So I'm looking forward to getting into it again. Her dad is the current prophet of the AUB, and she actually grew up with some of the famously known sister wives from that TV show, which sadly I've not watched yet. Maybe I will eventually, but we're going to get into some of that as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Melanie Kerner.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, of course. So you actually have your own YouTube channel where you are talking about your experiences in the AUB and different things about it. So tell everybody why you started that channel.
Yeah, I started the channel. My dad became the prophet of the AUB about 3 years ago, and some of my siblings decided to speak out about it. And I felt like their representation wasn't as fair and honest about how we actually grew up. So I decided to start speaking out about it, and so that I could tell a fair and balanced story of what it was truly like. Not everybody's evil and bad. Not everybody is good and nice. And I felt like some of the stories were very misrepresented. So I decided to just start telling my own story. I've been told my entire life I should write a book, or I should, start my own channel. My kids have been asking me for years to start my own channel. And I thought, oh, that's silly. Who wants to hear those kind of stories? And so I just decided to just give it a go one day. And I hit one video that went viral, and it just kind of went from there. So I started to get
That's amazing.
a lot of viewership. Yeah, I had a video go over 1 million views, and
Oh my gosh.
yeah, it was fun. It was a little scary, but it was fun. And so I just decided to start speaking out a little bit more about the way that we were raised, to maybe give that overall perspective.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So guys, if you want to follow her channel, Notes to Sell 444, link is in the description that you can go to that after our interview. Not right now, after our interview.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about your childhood. So let's start with some early memories, maybe talk about your family dynamic and how you were raised.
Okay. Yeah. One of the very first videos that I ever did was how, as a child, I felt like I lost my voice and I didn't understand why. I'd done a lot of therapy since I've left the AUB. One of the biggest things was I grew up with four mothers, 34 brothers and sisters. My dad has since had 8 wives, but at the time we had the 4 main ones. When I was little, my dad would treat one wife a lot more he favored one over the other. My mom was the least favorite, and the least favored. And I said to her when I was about 3 years old, why does dad love this mother and her children more than he loves us? And my mom would remind me of that story, not to try to hurt my feelings or anything, but she would remind me of this story quite often. Like, this is why I moved. And so she gathered up her children and she moved out of the family home. We all lived together in one home.
Wow, that's a lot of people in one home.
Yeah.
The
Well,
4 wives and 34 kids?
at the time, there was only the 2 wives. And so
Okay.
so my mom's the second wife. The first wife left, and then he only had 3 wives at the time. So that when the first wife divorced him, and then he had the 2 wives. So there was only 2 wives and 5 children when she
Okay.
moved out. Yeah. And so she would tell me that story. That's why I moved. And I remember thinking as a child, it caused me to believe that my voice caused separation. And so I didn't use my voice for a long time because I thought it caused separation. I was the one who tore the family apart. I was the one that made my mom leave the family home. And so it took me a lot of years to figure out that little belief system that I had going on and heal through that so that I could speak publicly about our lives. And so finally, I've done so much therapy throughout the years. My dad got his 4th wife when I was 4 years old, almost 5 years old. And then the 5th wife came along when I was 14. And so then the other wives came along after I was married and out of the house. So I didn't grow up in the same home. My mom kept her own home up until I was 16. And then my dad doubled us all up. In that same family home, there was 3 parents and 17 children. So we did eventually all end up in the same home in about a 2,200 square foot home, 3 wives, 3
Holy
adults and 17
cow.
children. Yeah, it was craziness. And so I was 16 when that happened. And then I ended up getting married at 17. A week after I turned 17.
Holy cow. Okay, we're going to back up a little bit. That's a lot to
Yeah.
unpack and to talk about. So, first of all, I'm interested in your perspective of these other moms because at 3, you're already having this instinct that something's off, that dad doesn't seem to be paying attention to you guys as much. So, did you have resentment for the other wives, especially as he continued to get more and you got older?
Yes, very much so, especially the one wife that was just his favorite wife. It was really hard to be around her and her children because they were so favored. They got all the things. We got the leftovers. We got the scraps. Most of my life, I don't remember her working outside of the home. She did a lot of genealogy type stuff, did a lot of advocacy for polygamy with the state legislatures and stuff like that with Christine Brown. That is how the TLC show started, was they went to this other mother and her group of women that got together. So that's kind of what work she did outside of the home, where my mom would work 2, 3, 4 jobs sometimes to try to provide for her children. And it felt like this other wife was handed so much where my mom was handed nothing.
Yeah.
And so it was hard to be a child under those circumstances, especially the oldest. That was really hard on me. I picked up a lot of the slack that happened because there just wasn't 2 parents in the home ever. And so
Yeah.
I was the second mom, and that caused strain on the relationship that I have with my mother's children, because I was seen more of a parentified child than I was actually a sibling. So that caused a lot of discontent between me and my siblings with my mom's children. So yeah. And it was hard to, I did a video on the different personalities of different wives that I noticed growing up in the different sister wives. And I caught on to that very, very early. And then when I was 14, my dad got married again, and that wife became the favorite wife. And so the first favorite wife got bumped out of her position, which was not fun for the whole family to experience. That was really hard.
So
Yeah.
what would be the major differences? Are we talking about food or clothing, like basic necessities, or just things in excess that they would get?
Yeah, a lot of food and clothing. They, when the school year would start, we would get a pair of pants, a shirt, if that. We were lucky if we got that. If it was brand new or if it was secondhand. The other wives, her kids always seemed to be well dressed. They always, if we got a trampoline or her family would get that and we could all go to her house and enjoy the extras. My mom's family never got anything extra. We didn't have extras. We were so poor growing up. And so we didn't get a lot of that extra stuff. But if there was anything extra, it went to her home. And then if she got a new something, we would get the old something.
Right.
Whatever it was, dishes. At one point, my dad bought all of his wives the same bedroom set. Yeah, that was fun.
That feels a little weird.
It feels a lot weird. My mom got rid of that thing so fast. She couldn't get rid of it fast enough. But she did keep it for about 10 years before she got rid of it. But yeah, those were some of the things. But then the favorite wife wanted a bedroom set. So she picked them out. But of course, he can't just buy her one. So he buys all of them one.
Okay, there's so many directions I want to go here. First of all, I just want to know, was he just not expected to provide for his wives? Like you said, your mom had 3 to 4 jobs.
Typically what he would do is he would pay the mortgage and the utilities, or the rent and the utilities. And then it was the wife's job to do everything else, what he considered non-important or non-essential items. And for the longest time, my mom did pay her own rent because she's the one who chose to leave the family home. So she paid her own rent for quite a few years. And then they got back in good graces. My mom got back in my dad's good graces, and he started paying rent again for her until she purchased a home. And then he would pay the mortgage and all the utilities. But other than that, it was her responsibility. Disposable diapers were not a big thing back then. They were just starting to become. So we did a lot of cloth diapers because my mom couldn't afford a lot of disposables. So those were the things that she would have to buy with her money if she wanted anything.
Okay.
So, food-wise, we were extremely poor. Our staple food was potatoes. We would live on a million different ways to cook potatoes. I had to learn very, very young how to cook just about anything with very limited resources. And there was a local Catholic church that we would go to that would give food, and we would go in the food lines. And then my grandparents
that's interesting
Yeah.
because within Mormonism, I don't know if this is how it was in your branch, but the Catholic Church was seen as the great and abominable church. And so, but you're going to get food from the Catholic Church.
Yeah, it definitely, we were taught that too. But this particular Catholic church was right behind my grandparents' home. And so they were very familiar with the pastor. My grandparents were not polygamists. In fact, they disowned my mom for a long time when she decided to join polygamy and marry my dad. And so they basically disowned her and told her to stay away until I was born. And then, of course, that changed things for them. And so that was one of the ways that my mom, because my grandma, even though she wasn't Catholic, she was Mormon, LDS. My mom, both of my parents were raised LDS.
What?
And they converted. Yeah. My dad married his first wife in the Salt Lake Temple, and then a year later married my mom as a second wife.
A year later. Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
so then how did your dad get introduced to the AUB, and was it in Utah?
Yeah. So the leader of the AUB is Rulon Allred. I'm sure you're probably familiar with some of the stories. So he was the leader of the AUB, and my dad, one of Rulon's sons was my dad's best friend. And so my dad was introduced to the AUB at 13, and he joined the AUB when he was 13 years old. And my dad has always been a very deep religious, knows the Book of Mormon like the back of his hand. Very, very, everything about church comes before anything else. It doesn't matter. Your wife could be in labor, and if you had a priesthood meeting, you go to priesthood meeting. And I think to this day, he still does priesthood meetings on the general conference weekends, because he's always taken his boys to priesthood meetings, every general conference. And so, yeah, he's very much an advocate. We were never allowed to speak ill of the LDS Church ever, because he believes that one day the LDS Church, what I was always taught was the LDS church was the mother and the feminine energy. The priesthood was the masculine energy, and that one day they would be back together again. But it was the AUB's responsibility to keep all of the laws that Joseph Smith brought so that the AUB could go ahead and continue all of that. And then one day the church would come back together with the AUB, which pisses off a lot of Mormon people.
I'm sure. So for those listening who aren't familiar with Mormonism, if you are, you already know the story. But basically, Joseph Smith founded Mormonism. He brought polygamy back. It was this whole thing. Brigham Young continued it when Joseph Smith died. And then a few prophets later, the United States was like, hey, you can't do that. It's illegal. They practiced in secret. And they're like, seriously, we are going to come for you. So they're like, okay, fine, we'll stop. So polygamy ended through, quote, revelation within the Mormon church. But then many people were like, Joseph Smith was very clear that you have to practice polygamy to enter the kingdom of God. We're going to keep doing this. And so all the factions were born. So you have the work, you have the order, you have the FLDS, you have the AUB. So all of these groups split off and basically said, we're going to continue following what Joseph Smith said. So what Melanie is saying is the AUB is like, no, the LDS church, like the mainstream Mormon church, they know what they're doing, but eventually polygamy is going to come back. It's going to be restored the way that it was initially. So that's really interesting that you grew up with still being fond of the mainstream church, but still very separate.
Yeah. Well, because both of my parents were raised and they both have a deep love and affection for the LDS church. Now, my dad's side of the family, my grandparents had 11 children and they all joined the AUB. My mom's side of the family, she's the only one that joined the AUB. And so her parents had 8 children, I believe. And my mom's the only one that joined. So, and she knew Rulin Allred very well too. And so Rulin Allred is the one who baptized my parent. Well, not baptized, but he's the one who converted my parents into the AUB.
So when it comes to just the way you practice or the way that you dress, is there anything different from the mainstream Mormon church? Do you still go to church on Sundays and have priesthood meetings, or is that very different?
Sacrament is probably the biggest difference because in the Mormon church, everything is individualized, where in the AUB, everything is whole. So the bread is whole and then they break it apart. The water is whole and everyone drinks out of the same, like 12 cups or 16 cups or however many they need for that day. So yeah, that was gross growing up. That was a really hard experience to have. And so that's some of the main differences. But yes, we had young women's, we called it girls' class. There was priesthood meetings and we were just taught different things. We were taught how to be a good sister wife. We were taught how to take care of your husband. We were taught how to live the principle of plural marriage. Those were the things that we were taught in young women's instead of whatever the church teaches.
Just how to be a good wife. Yeah, I can attest to what the mainstream Mormon church teaches, just how to be a good regular wife, but you're learning how to be a good plural wife. So as a kid, especially having the knowledge or the awareness that your mom is less favored as a plural wife, what are you thinking about as especially a young teen of, I don't want to be a plural wife, or this is just what I have to do, or what were your expectations around that?
It was just always something that I was expected to do. And so when I got married so young, I was, 8 days into 17. He was 25 when I got married. I got pregnant immediately because there's no contraceptive allowed. I got pregnant immediately, which then I got morning sickness and I was really, really sick. And so he immediately started looking for wife number 2. And that was really hard to go through, being so young, being so sick. I was devastated when I got married. My mom was pregnant and I didn't know she was pregnant. And the thought had never occurred to me that she'd have more children after I left home. And I was devastated to think that these children wouldn't know who I was. And I was devastated to think that who's going to care for them? I'm not going to be there to care for them.
Right. Because how many siblings?
My mom had 11.
11.
And I'm the oldest.
And you're okay. So how many siblings were you caring for before you left the home? Was it about 10 then?
Yeah, there was 9. 9 of us.
9. Mm-hmm. Wow. Being pregnant at the same time as your mom. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I have my oldest 3 children and my mom's youngest 3 children are the same age, are very relatively close to the same age.
So before we get into your marriage more, I want to talk about the process of getting there. So was this an arranged marriage? Do you have any say? How did this whole process happen?
I felt like at the time I had as much say as I knew that I had. And so if you asked me back then, did you make this decision? Absolutely, I made this decision. But if your decision is option A or option B, and they're both terrible decisions, you're going to make the best decision that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And when my parents moved us all in together into the same home, there was 17 children. I didn't have a bed. I didn't have a dresser. I didn't have anywhere to sleep. Quite often, my mom had made me a blanket when I was 3. Quite often, I ended up sleeping on the floor somewhere with that blanket. I didn't even have a pillow.
Oh, man.
The one dresser that I had, very seldom did we ever have our own beds. There just wasn't enough for us to have our own bed. So we shared bedrooms. I've never had my own bedroom in my entire life, and never had my own bed. So quite often I'd find myself sleeping on the floor. So my options were continue that or get married, because there was no space for me at the home. And my parents were trying to keep me away from a boy that I was semi in love with, or as in love with as I thought I was at the time. My parents were trying to keep me away from him, and my ex-husband was the best option. And so let's push her all the way towards that. And then when I got married, my dad says to me, I'm so happy that you're now going to be taken care of, and that this is one less burden that I have to worry about.
He did not say that to you.
He did. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. And so there's just too many kids. So he had 4 wives at the time, and he put 2 wives in one house and 2 wives in the other house. And of course, my mom and the other wife are like the ones that had all the children. The other 2 wives were the ones with the least amount of children. And so they were in a trailer, and my parents were, and my mom and my other mom were in a home. But yeah, there just was not space for me. So at the time, that was my best option, was to get married. And then I got married and moved out for 6 months. And then, of course, he took all the equity from my mom's home and from the other homes, and he bought a huge home just down the street and moved the wives in there. So then my mom had the home to herself. My ex-husband and I moved it back into my mom's home and lived there for 2 years. I was so worried about my siblings that we moved back in there. We had our own apartment. We had our own space, but I lived there for 2 years.
Let's talk about how well you knew this man. I'm going to call him a man because you were still a teenager. So did you know him? Were you interested in him?
Yeah, we group dated. We weren't allowed to single date until you were 16. And of course, I was engaged at 16. And so, yeah, I did know him, and I knew his friend, and we'd all been going to the activities, the volleyball games, the youth activities that we would go to. And so, yeah, we were dating type as much as you could date. But his best friend liked me too. And he was he was about 12 years older than me. My ex-husband was 8 years older than me. And they couldn't decide who got to date me. So they flipped a coin.
What?
And my ex-husband won. So that's how I was dating my ex-husband.
They flipped a coin.
Mm-hmm.
So is there really no push or no effort being made as far as making love connections? It's really just kind of matching whoever they think should go together?
Right. And that is really what it was. And, fortunately, my mom taught her children not to see color. And so all of her children have an ethnic partner of some sort. And so my ex-husband was Hispanic, and that never crossed my mind that I couldn't marry an Hispanic man, because there's a lot of racism in the AUB. And so one of my friends said to me, "Can you even marry him?" And I was like, "Why?" I was so surprised at the question. And she's like, "Well, because he's Mexican." And I was like, "What?" So it had never crossed my mind. And so I went to my dad, and my dad was highly offended that I would even ask such a ridiculous question, because of course I could marry him, but only Hispanics. That's it. You can't marry anyone else.
Yeah. So he was AUB?
Mm-hmm. He was, his family. So my dad is very in love with the Hispanic culture. He does a lot of proselyting in Mexico, and there's a colony in Mexico, and they have a temple down there. And yeah, there's a lot of AUB members in Mexico. And so, yeah, that thought had never even crossed my mind when I went to marry him. And so, yeah, my older 3 children are Hispanic, and my younger 2 children are with my current husband, who is fully Caucasian. So my
Yeah.
kids look completely different from each other. I've got 2 blonde and blues and 3 really dark kids. Yeah. But fortunately,
Yeah.
my mom, like I said, she didn't teach us to see color at all. And that was really important to my mom. So we literally have a rainbow of children and spouses in our family, from Japanese to Tongan to El Salvadorian to Lebanese to Italian. Like, there's just a whole rainbow of children, which we love.
Yeah. So let's talk more about the early part of your marriage then. So you get pregnant right away. Was there any sort of education around this is how you get pregnant, or this is how to avoid pregnancy, or was contraception even allowed?
No contraceptives at all. And I was more familiar with it. I was really abused growing up sexually by numerous people. That is one thing that the AUB definitely has, I would say, an epidemic problem with that, because it's just so rampant. My ex-husband sexually assaulted me before we were married.
Oh,
And my dad, he was angry with me over my ex-boyfriend. And so he had what he said, he called a righteous anger. So he sexually assaulted me on my parents' bed. And then he ran straight to my dad's office and said, "This is what happened. I was mad at her. I've taken time, I've taken money, I've taken resources to court her as if she was going to be my wife. And she is still interested and still seeing her ex-boyfriend." He went to my dad and told him that he had this righteous anger. And I was probably 16, maybe almost 16 when this happened. And my dad called me, and I was, of course, crying, right? I'm physically bruised everywhere. I'm crying. And my dad says, "What's happening, young lady?" And I said, "I know, Dad, I don't know what to do about this." And he says to me, this man just came to my office and told me what happened. And I'm like, "I know." And I'm thinking, my dad's just going to kill him, right? It's going to be over. I don't have to worry about this man ever again. I don't have to deal with like this obligation. And my dad says, "When somebody like this," says his name, "when somebody like this bothers with somebody like you, and this is how you repay him, you owe him an apology." And so my dad forced me to apologize to him because he had bothered with me. And so I had to apologize to him. Why my dad stood there and watched me apologize to him. And then we were engaged 6 months later and married 6 months later.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah,
That
it
is
was pretty
awful.
brutal. It was very rough. So, but that's just kind of how the expectation, women and children don't have a lot of rights and don't have a lot of opinions. Now, my grandma has something like 350 grandchildren. And I was the first one to get married in the AUB and the first one to leave the AUB. And so, yeah, when I first got married, I knew somewhat of the process only because I had been so abused.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I immediately got pregnant. There's no birth control. There's no anything. And fortunately, I didn't have a lot of intimacy with my husband. So it was a lot easier for me to avoid pregnancy. And I didn't get pregnant again until I was 18. And I had my second child at 19. And then after that, I started reading all of the books on how to figure out how to not get pregnant naturally. And then I didn't have another child with him for 5 more years.
Wow.
Because I was so determined not to have that many children. I just didn't.
Yeah.
I always thought I'd have a dozen children, just like my mom. You just grow up thinking that this is what you're going to do. But then I had the first 2 and I was like, oh my gosh, this is way different than caring for my mother's children. And so then it was so overwhelming. And I was 19. And so I learned how to put the brakes on that really quick.
What were some of the key things that you learned, just for those listening who may be in a similar situation?
Well, you can only get pregnant at certain times during the month. And so I really started to track my ovulation cycles. And I'm a bookworm, so I love to research so that I know everything that I'm doing. That was the biggest thing, is I just made sure. Now, we were not very intimate ever, because you are only intimate to create the most righteous children. So if you're not planning on having children, you just don't have intimacy.
Oh.
And so that made it a lot easier for me. And then, of course, in the AUB, I was always taught you're intimate wearing your garments, which I did. I wore garments up to my neck, down to my wrists, down to my ankles. They were full full
The
body.
old-fashioned garments.
They were, yeah. And so I got those when I went through the endowment house, when I went through the temple, when we originally got married. It made intimacy a lot less frequent. It was more of an obligation that I did, like maybe once every 6 months. So it was a lot easier to make sure that I didn't get pregnant because of that, because there just wasn't the frequency there. If it was my obligationary period where I needed to like do my responsibility, then I just made sure it wasn't in those days that I could get pregnant.
Yeah. Just the fact that that you have to call it your obligation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it feels so unloving and so transactional.
It was very.
I think, well, I want your opinion on this. From my perspective, it seems like pros and cons, right? The pros being that you don't actually have to be intimate as frequently with someone you don't love or someone who has harmed you or your abuser, you're living with this perpetrator. And then on the other hand, you don't get to experience that love,
Right.
that sensuality. But so how are you feeling as a young girl? I mean, you're a teenager, you have children. Is this just kind of like, well, this is what marriage is supposed to be like? Or did you realize something was missing?
I really just kind of felt like that's what marriage was supposed to be like. It wasn't anything that, and I loved him as much as I could, but it was really hard because he instantly went in to look for wife number 2. And he already had his eyes set on someone. And the prophet wanted him to marry her. I had no voice in that situation, or I felt that I didn't at the time, because it was already like, this is what's going to happen. And the prophet already wanted this to happen. My dad was like, yeah, let's do this. And because I was going to be that gold shining star that showed that my dad had raised his children right, and I was going to be the first one in polygamy, of course, I felt like it was coming at me from every direction, and I didn't have the option to say no. Yeah. So he courted this girl for a while, but then she was courting 3 or 4 other people at the same time. And that was really hard. And then I found out I was pregnant again for the second time. And I just said, I don't want to do this while I'm pregnant. And I don't know where I found that voice to even felt like I have the option to say that. And so then we went to church one Sunday, and the prophet pulled us up onto the stage, and he was, hey, what's happening? Like, why have you guys pulled back? You're my choice for her. And I was like, I just yelled at him, like, which you don't yell at the prophet. And I yelled at him on the stage, and I kind of made slightly a scene, but I was like, what do you want us to do? She's dating 4 other people at the same time that she's dating us. And I'm pregnant and I don't want to do this. And it was Owen Allred was the prophet at the time. And I was like, Brother Owen, I don't want to do this. And so he starts crying, and he's like, I know, sweetheart, this is going to be so hard for you. I totally understand that. And I still want her to marry you. And so that was really hard. I would not have been a very good sister wife. I was not very nice at the time. And so I just told my ex-husband, I was like, absolutely not. And so he did shame me a lot, and the prophet did shame me a lot. And one night I did have an attempt at my life because I was just so over the whole thing. And we were on our way home from church. I almost think it was the same night that the prophet yelled at us, but I sometimes that memory gets spotty for me. He's yelling at me in the car and telling me on how unhappy he is with me, and that he deserves to be happy, and that I'm the one holding him back from his happiness because he wanted to marry a blonde and I wasn't blonde. And he wanted to marry somebody who was sweet and I wasn't sweet. And he wanted to marry, and he's giving me this list of all these reasons why I'm not what he wanted. And, so we got home, and yeah, I was done. I went into the bedroom, and I had really severe postpartum depression. And my baby was about 9 months old, and that was when I
Your
had
first baby?
My second. So I was on my second baby at this point, and we were now revisiting courting this same girl. And it was because she was 16. The first time we started to court her, she was 16. I was 18, and he was 27. That felt really predatory to me. So yeah. So that was really kind of that's what got me on my healing journey was that attempt. What stopped me is my 2-year-old little boy came out, and he started crying, I need my mommy. And all of a sudden it was like, I came back into my body. I was out of my body, and I came back into my body, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't leave my children with this man. Like, who's going to make sure that they're okay? And it just like threw me back into reality really quickly. And I have to heal. I have to get better. I can't be this sad all the time. And so that's what started me. And I had just turned 20. And so it was just right after my 20th birthday. So ever since then, I've been on this constant working through all of the things, like all of the abuses of every level. And it's been a long 30 years. I just turned 50. So it's been a long 30 years.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing all of that. What a dark place to be in. And something that really stood out to me is you said that she was dating both of you. She was dating us. And that seems really interesting. So were you part of these dates and the courting process?
I was, because I didn't feel comfortable with him going. He had a lot of extracurricular activities outside of our marriage, and they were really hard on me because we were absolutely taught that this is just the most evil thing you can possibly do, any sort of pornography, anything like that. And he had a lot of those extracurricular activities, and I just didn't feel confident in that. So I went on every date, everything that he did too. So, and in fact, I digitalized some of our old home videos recently, and I found one of us on a date with her.
No.
I'm so embarrassed.
Gosh, can I see it? I want to see it.
And it's just my behavior, the way that I was at the time. I feel I have to heal through some of that because I feel shame when I watch it. I feel a little bit of shame.
Because you weren't very nice to the other woman?
I was just so conditioned. I don't recognize that person at all anymore, but I was so conditioned in that lifestyle that my behavior felt embarrassing to me, that I would support that in the first place. And that I was just like, I don't know. I was so brainwashed and so believed that this man could do no wrong. It was all me. Everything was my fault. Everything was my problem. If I supported and loved my husband more, and so I'm just, the way I talk, the way I present myself, it's sad. It's really sad.
Well, you know what? That's probably the most relatable thing that you could ever say on the show. And I know people listening who have been through those scenarios. That's why we have the best-selling shirt, which is, I'm sorry for what I said when I was in a cult, because we've all been there.
Yeah.
We've all played the role. We've not only played, but we stepped into the role that we were given. It's just something that you do. It's part of your conditioning, because why would you act differently? You don't know differently.
Right.
So yeah, it's completely understandable. I've seen videos of myself too, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing. It's kind of endearing in a way, but then it's also like, how did I think that way, or why did I buy into that? Because you kick yourself once you see through it all, but there's no way of seeing through it when you're that young and you're in it. You can't expect more from a teenager, especially, who was put into it so young and given children so young, and it's just a lot to handle. So I don't think anyone would blame you for that. But I know the feeling of the cringe watching old videos.
That's exactly what it is.
Or old diaries and
cringiness. Well, and she was in high school. We were on a high school field trip, of all things. I was 18, she was 16, he was 27. And it was just, I was so conditioned. And it's like, when I watched it, I felt so embarrassed. And then I would just, at the same time, but then I just wanted to go scoop this little girl up and tell her that it was going to be okay, that she was going to get through this. Because at the time, I didn't know if I would.
Yeah.
And I just had my little boy at the time, and he was 1.5, I think. Yeah, it was just one of those things where it's like so cringeworthy, but it was who I was at that time. And my kids will watch that and they're like, who is that person? They don't even recognize me. Because I've changed so significantly. Now, I didn't think that I looked that polygamist, but my kids are like, what the hell, Mom? Who are you? How
did you look different? Because I know you're not dressing like FLDS in the long dresses, right? You kind of wear normal-ish clothes.
Right. I always had the braids, always had the long hair and the braids. My hair was always down to my bum, always braided, always. I very seldom ever wore makeup. I made most of my own clothes because we were just so poor that I would sew all my own dresses. And so that was really a lot of it. I just didn't have a sense of any sort of style. It was just what I could afford to make. And the dresses that I wore were, everything was homemade, and mostly I wore dresses. And then when you're wearing garments, you're limited on what options you have for clothing. And so everything's long sleeved, everything's, higher up on your neckline, and everything's long to the ground. And so you're limited. And I'm 6'2". So I am very tall.
You are?
I am. And so
Whoa.
trying to find clothes that fit a 6'2" girl is really hard, especially pregnant. I really struggled through finding modest clothes that would fit my garments and be 6'2" and be pregnant. It was a struggle. So that's why I made most of my own clothes.
Okay. So one more question about the dating thing, and then I want to talk more about when you decided to leave for the first time. So because I haven't had anyone on in your specific position, I'm wondering from your perspective as the first wife courting the second wife, if you noticed the one being courted feeling a little odd, did she want to become a plural wife? Was she pushing back against it? How did that make you feel as the first wife? All of that stuff.
She did. She was definitely, I think she's a plural wife now. I've kind of lost track of her, but she's still in the AUB, and I believe she is a plural wife now, but she's the first wife. The man she ended up marrying was it was actually the brother of one of the guys she was dating when she was courting us. And so she did want to be. On her 17th birthday, I had to tell my husband, go get her some flowers. Like, that would be the appropriate thing to do, to give her some flowers. And she was really uncomfortable with it too. They used my baby a lot as a way to kind of flirt back and forth.
What? What do you mean?
I think children are used as a way to break some of that barrier between the awkwardness, because in the AUB, the courtships are usually so quick. They're a couple of months. And so it's hard to have eye contact with somebody. It's hard to talk to somebody. You barely know them. So you do a lot of the interactions through the children. And so it's like, oh, look how cute your baby is. So what do you like the most about your baby? What do you like the most, And then she's flirty and touchy with my baby. And that just lit a fire in me.
Yeah.
That I was like, don't use my child to get another wife. That felt so wrong. One particular event, my ex-husband at the time, came up missing, and my baby was with him, and I was like, started to panic, and I go find out, and I go running around trying to find them, and they're over in the corner, and she's playing with him and he's flirting with her. And I just lit a fire in me there. I was just like, oof. And so I walked right up to him, and I'm like, give me my child. And she's like, he's so cute. You did such a good job with him. And I just growled at her. I was not nice. And my ex-husband's like, he's fine. And I'm like, don't ever use my children to flirt with your girlfriend again. And I picked up my baby and I walked away.
Good for you.
It was bad. And so I got in the car and I was like, I'm done. And so I just got in the car, buckled my baby up, and started to leave. And he went to run out to the car like, I'm going to go with you. I'm like, yeah. I almost ran him over. And then he got in the car and we left. And he's like, I got in so much trouble for that. If you ever embarrass me in public like that again, that'll be the last time you go to public. And so I got really chastised really hard for that one.
Jeez.
But yeah, I feel like the children are a way that, because the courtships they're like an icebreaker. It's who you can kind of talk back and forth with without directly communicating. Hey, what are your wishes and dreams and goals? What is it that you want to do in life? Those are not conversations that are had before you get married in the AUB.
Right. Well, probably because it doesn't matter, right? To them, all that matters is having more kids.
Right. So how is she going to interact with children? Is she going to be a good mother? Is she not going to be a good mother? Is she going to be nurturing? Is she not going to be nurturing? Those are the most important things. So her goals and aspirations and dreams were secondary, or they weren't even secondary. They weren't even on the question.
So did you feel a possessiveness when he was, because obviously there's going to be some sort of jealousy, whether or not you have a real connection with him. That's still your husband, and he's the father of your kids. And so I imagine that watching him with another girl, first of all, open in public would just make your skin crawl a little bit. But then watching her try to mother your children, knowing that if she comes into the family, she's a second mom, like that must get, ooh.
It did. I've always been a very, very big mother bear. Always. I was not happy about that one. And I grew a fondness and an affection for him. Could I ever say that I was really in love with him? Absolutely not. But I definitely had a fondness. I definitely had an affection. He was just so abusive on so many levels. He would put me in very compromising situations, and then he would use those against me later. So he would force me into these compromising situations, and then he would use them against, we need to go tell the prophet what we've done now. And I'm like, no, I don't want to get in trouble. But then he would force me into these situations. And so that's kind of where I felt like I just never got that deep affection for him, because that was the way he manipulated and controlled so much of the situation. And so, yeah, watching him with another woman was definitely like, what? But I always said I could live polygamy with him because I didn't have that real deep, intimate. My husband now, there's not a chance. I would never do it. And my husband now is from the AUB as well, but we didn't meet until we had both left the AUB, and then we met each other. But yeah, back then I probably could have shared him. It would have given me a break. It would have given me some relief time where I didn't have to worry about him. I didn't have to be responsible for him and what he needed. I could just take care of my kids. And so I felt like, yeah, I could have probably done polygamy fairly easily, but not when my children are being used in that way. That was my line that I had no tolerance for at all.
I would be the same. Like, don't touch my kid. That's my kid. Get away.
Yeah.
So around this time, your father becomes the prophet. That's huge. Did that all of a sudden turn all eyes to you?
No, he actually became the prophet about 3 years ago.
Oh, I thought you were 19 when he became prophet.
He actually became an apostle when I was 19.
Oh,
so then he was put on. So they do the same kind of leadership as the LDS Church. So he becomes he's like the president of the 70s for years. He's always been in leadership, but now he becomes an apostle when I was 19.
Okay,
and that was my first major crisis of faith. That was really when I was like, what is happening? Because I knew this man, I was beaten regularly by this man. And he's a good man. He tries to be a good man. He does it, he says to me, maybe about 3 years ago, he's like, I never beat you. Maybe 2 years ago when I put out my first video about him beating us, he's like, I never beat you. And I'm like, yeah, you did, Dad. You broke skin regularly. Like, you left bruises on us regularly. And he's like, it was corporal punishment. I wasn't beating you. And so for him, this is what he thought was regular, normal life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he literally didn't comprehend in his brain that he was abusive. And so when he became an apostle, that was just like, what in the hell is happening right now? And so I went through a crisis of faith because I was one of the oldest children. When he just became the prophet about 3 years ago, that's when my younger siblings because they grew up with him always being an apostle. So they didn't have that crisis of faith. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago when he became the prophet that all of them went, what in the hell is happening? Like, this is not real life. And
wow.
Yeah. So that was when a lot of people started publicly speaking. I never thought I'd publicly speak out. But that's when a lot of my siblings started to publicly speak out, because they're like, wait a second, this man has literally abused us our entire life. How is he the mouthpiece for God on the planet now?
Yeah. Confusing.
It's very confusing. So I'd had to walk through that process with a lot of my siblings. They've come to me and they're like, how did you deal with this? And so I'm like, I didn't deal with it very well, because I did leave the AUB when I was 22. It took me a couple of years to finally get out.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that first time that you left?
So the prophet that was before my dad, in the AUB, you have Sunday schools, you have church, but the Sunday schools were typically family Sunday schools. So you'd go to someone's home and you'd have like a family Sunday school. So the prophet that was right before my dad, we went to his family Sunday school. And so here we are, we're at Sunday school one Sunday, and I was already starting to question things a lot. I had gone through some intense therapy for about 2 years because I had had an attempt on my life. And so I'm about 2 years into therapy now and trying to heal through things. And I'm also watching my little girl start to grow up. And I'm like wondering what am I going to do for her? Because I don't want her to experience the things I've experienced. And so we're at this family Sunday school, and this prophet is leaning it up against the fireplace, and he's like Google eyeing my little 2-year-old sitting on the carpet. And
No.
I was just,
Ugh.
I was sick to my stomach, and I was looking at her and I was looking at him, and he's got this most wretched smile on his face of just, one day, sweetheart, you're going to grow up, and, and I just went,
my
I'm done.
gosh.
I can't do this to her. I cannot make her have the life that I've had. I can't do this. And so I stopped going. I took off my garments, which is a huge indicator that you've now left.
Big deal.
It was a really big deal. I was very respectful about the process because I felt like that was a promise that I had made between me and God, not necessarily the leadership of the AUB. And so, I just went, I can't do this. And so I left, stopped going to church. My dad was devastated. My grandmother, who's now the Relief Society president, she is married to the prophet now, not my grandpa. She's now married to the prophet. She is devastated over this whole thing.
So your grandma on your dad's side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I was thinking about your grandma who was not in the AUB. So your grandma married the prophet. That's interesting.
Yeah. So a lot of pictures that you'll see of Owen with all of his wives, my grandma's in those photos. Oh, yeah. They're all over the internet. So, she married Owen, the prophet Owen, a month before I married my ex-husband. So we got married very close at the same time. She was single for, a lot of years. She had left my grandpa when I was 5. So she was single for 12 years, 11 years. And then she married the prophet. And then she was the Relief Society president. So I was a stain on them for leaving. She had 350 grandchildren. There was a lot of the grandchildren that just never accepted the AUB. And so they weren't in it. But I was the first one to actually get married and then leave, which you just did not do. And so of course, everyone was devastated. And my dad would beg me all the time, please come back, please come back. Then I had my my third baby. And I was never having another child with this man. I knew how not to. I was never having another child with him. But then it was like, I don't know. I've never heard the word, like the voice of God. And this might sound silly to some people, but it was like the voice of God told me to have this baby. And I was like, what? I don't want any more children with this man. And it just kept coming to me to have this child. And he's so lucky he got born because I really did not want to have any more children with this man. So I end up pregnant, have this baby. It took me over a year to get pregnant and that was tormenting for me to try to get pregnant with him. And I end up having him, and he has a heart condition. So I went, oh my gosh, God is punishing me for leaving. This is why God told me to have this baby, so I could see the error of my ways, and I needed to go back. And so I was 24. I had just turned 24, and I went back for almost 2 years. And then my ex-husband's extracurricular activities just got worse and worse and worse. And he thought that he had given me some sort of disease, which is what caused our son's heart condition. And so I had to go in and get a panel.
Because he was sleeping around or something?
Mm-hmm. Well, he was hiring people. And so, he wasn't actually like having girlfriends or anything. They were all paid for. And so, I had to go in and get tested for everything under the sun. And so here's my baby, 2 weeks old, 3 weeks old, and all of this comes out. And it was one of the most devastating nights of mine. So we just get back from the hospital. We find out that our baby's got this, whatever's happening with him. And then my husband decides to just unload everything on me all at once that same night. And I just sat there like, I'm still very postpartum. I mean, he's only a couple weeks old, and it just devastated my entire life. And I ran back and I told my dad, I'm so sorry. I wish that I would never have left in the first place because of leaving, my ex-husband had nobody to be accountable to. And so I couldn't go tell on him to the priesthood, and they could make him do what he was supposed to do. And so I felt like that was my problem. He didn't respect me enough as a person to not do those things to hurt our marriage, but he did respect the priesthood if they told him not to do stuff. So it took me about 4 years. I never legally married him. I only married him through the religion. I went back to the AUB and was very, very active, got rebaptized, had my garments put back on me, was very active, did every single thing I was supposed to do, went to church every Sunday, did all of the things. And then it just wasn't getting any better. And my ex-husband was getting worse and worse and worse. And finally, just one day I woke up and I'm like, what am I doing? What? And I was almost 26. And I just had like a moment that I was like, what am I doing? I can't do this to my children again. And then I just kind of had another awakening and left and never went back again. So,
Wow.
And then I met my current husband. I met him when I was 22 and he was 26. So then when I left again, I filed for divorce when I was 25, and it took about 2 years to get a legal divorce. And I'd already been trying to get a release from the priesthood council, and they just did not want to give me one because my ex-husband would claim, I've never touched them, I just watched them. And so therefore it was not considered adultery. And so he could get away with it, and I was just supposed to get over it. So I was invalidated over and over and over again because I was I was being too concerned about the situation because he wasn't actually touching these women. He was just watching them.
So he says.
Mm-hmm. But tens of thousands of dollars he spent on that kind of activity. So it was really rough. So finally one day I was just like, I finally called the prophet and I was just like, I am done. Today is my last day. And so then he let me come over. He's like, hey, tell him to come. And my mom came with us. And we went over to the prophet's home, and the prophet did his little speech that he does and released us, and it was done. And I walked away and never looked back at that point.
Wow. So you leave when you're 26, you said?
Mm-hmm.
And you call up your now husband. You're like, hey, by the way, I'm single. Let's meet up.
Well, I actually asked him before I was released because I didn't know how to get divorced. Like, what do I do? Do I just walk away? Do I not walk away? I didn't know I needed to file a legal divorce. I didn't know any of this. And so I'm just in limbo, right? And I'm just telling my dad, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? What if I want to date again? I have a 1-year-old. Like, I don't want to raise 3 children by myself. I'm 25, so I wasn't quite 26. And so I told my ex-husband, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to ask him out. I'm going to ask my new husband out. And he's like, no, you're not. You're still married to me. And no, I don't know how to get divorced. And so I started dating my current husband, and then he found out I didn't have a release. And we'd only been dating for about maybe 4 weeks. And he was like, yeah, even though he wasn't a part of it anymore, he was actually a member of the LDS church. He went into the LDS church. His mother's family is very LDS. His mother was the only one who joined the AUB. And so he had gone into the LDS church, and he found out I didn't have that release. He's like, I can't see you anymore until this happens. And I'm like, but it doesn't matter. I was very much, it doesn't matter to me. The AUB can't not control my life. And he was like, I know, but your dad will never accept me as your partner if you are still.
Ugh.
So that was the day that I called the prophet, and I was like, I'm done. I want a release today. And so then he gave me the release that day. And then I went back to my current husband. I'm like, okay, I got a release. And so then we started dating, which then threw my ex-husband into rage. Then there was a lot of violence and a lot of police and he spent a lot of time in jail. And one of the police officers finally came to the house, and he was like, why haven't you filed for a legal divorce? And I was like, I didn't legally get married. I don't know what to do. And he was like, you've been together for 10 years, right? And I said, well, yeah, almost 10 years. And so he says to me, you can go file a common law divorce. And so I went down to the courthouse, filed for protective orders because he was so violent, and got a protective order and filed for divorce. And it took me almost 2 years. And I fought for full custody and got full custody of my children. But it took me almost 2 years to do it, and a lot of money.
Whoa. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get clear here. So you didn't have a legal marriage. You had a priesthood marriage, but then you still had to legally file for custody, even though you weren't married?
Yeah. So that I could have full legal custody, and he has no legal custody.
Wow. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I didn't either. I didn't know that we could do that. So, and we had quite the estate being built up. We owned a couple homes at this point. He was very financially successful. which is, I feel like, sometimes led to his downfall because he had so many financial resources available to him to be able to pay for all of these things. And so, yeah, I had quite the estate built up with him. We had a lot of cash. We had a lot of homes. We had a lot of assets. And so really the only thing I fought for was legal custody. The judge did grant me one of our homes, and but he did walk away with about 70% of our marital assets, and I got 30. I just got what was left over that he couldn't sell. Yeah. So he did a lot of time in jail. Because he just thought the courts didn't have any power over him because he was above the law, because he was an AUB member. I don't know why he felt that way, but there's a lot of superiority with a lot of these AUB members, that they are above the law. A lot of people in the AUB forged documents and tried to help him so that I could not have full custody of my children. And that was one of the hardest fights I've ever had to do.
Yeah.
Ever.
Did he want custody? Was he a good dad?
Oh, he only wanted custody because he didn't want me to have it. That was the only reason he wanted it. And the judge saw that. And the judge reprimanded him for that. And so that's why, he had made a comment one time in one of the therapy sessions that we went to. And he's like, and we were playing like this game thing. And he says, I don't care if I win the game. I just don't want Melanie to win. And so that was how he came at the entire game was, and this is a therapy session to see how do you live your life together.
Yeah.
And the therapist was very much, you get away from him as fast as you can. And so he didn't care if he had custody. He just didn't want me to have it. That's why he fought so hard for it. And he really didn't fight for custody per se as much as he fought for all the assets, and then sold as much as he could, liquidated as much as he could. It was a horrible, horrible divorce. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, we're just quiet little people that don't ever get involved with like the law. I didn't even, like, my kids, I didn't file. We never get involved with the government. My kids didn't even have birth certificates for years. Because we just don't get involved with the government. We don't get involved with law enforcement. We don't get involved with the government. And so I literally did not have birth certificates for my children until they were much, much, much older. Like, I think my oldest was 7 when I got him a birth certificate finally, because you just didn't want the government involved in your life. And I was very much an advocate for keeping the government out of my life. Going through the whole legal process was such a foreign concept to me. I had no idea what to do. And I probably could have made better choices by not dating my current husband during this entire process. That was very antagonistic. My ex-husband felt that it was very antagonistic, and probably could have made that process go a tad bit smoother if I would have waited. But I'd been separate and for so long that I felt like I don't want to raise 3 children by myself. I'd like a partner to raise 3 children with. So, I could have made probably smarter choices back then. At the same time, too, I was angry. I was really angry that I felt so constricted and refined because these men didn't think I had the right to make my own choices for anything.
Yeah, it's totally valid that you're like, no, I want a partner, and you are finally doing what you wanted instead of catering to the whims of these whiny little man-childs.
Yeah. And the prophet was like, my ex-husband was such good friends with the prophet. So I had every level stacked against me in trying to make my own decision. That's where so much of the backlash came from, is like, no, you'll make the choices that we tell you will make. And so my current husband actually went and asked my dad, are you okay if I date Melanie and help her, have a relationship with her? My dad said, absolutely not. And he's like, absolutely no. He's like, you stay away from her. My husband was like, what? And he's like, she's going to marry somebody who already has an established family who can just take care of her and her children. And he didn't come to our wedding. He had very little to do with my husband for years and years and years, because that was the first time that I had stood up to my dad. I was 26. And so my current husband, he actually does the YouTube channel with me. He had come outside and I said, how did that go? And I was mad that he asked him. I'm like, my dad hasn't supported me financially. I haven't, like, in 10 years, my dad doesn't get a say in who I date, but my husband, my current husband, was trying to be as respectful and follow the process as much as possible. He grew up in the AUB. He knows what's expected. So that's why he went and asked. And so my dad comes out after my husband leaves. I give him a hug. He leaves. He's like, let's go back to your house. Let's talk about this. My dad comes out and he's like, was that young man touching you? I told him to stay away from you. And I was like, you did what? Excuse me? And I'm 26. I've got 3 babies. Like, what the hell? Who do you think you
Yeah.
are? And this is the first time I ever stood up to my dad. And he goes, I told him that you will either stay married to Joe, my ex-husband. You'll either stay married to Joe, or you will find a worthy priesthood holder that you'll marry, and he'll take care of you and your children. And I stood there for a second. I was livid. And I'm like, absolutely not, Dad. I will not do that. I will not be marrying back into the AUB, and I will not be staying married to Joe. And I said, and I will date Corey if I want to date Corey. And my dad was angry. I thought he was going to hit me. And he's like, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm going to have to talk to your mom about this. Like, he goes back in the house. I get in the car, and I'm just angry the whole entire drive home. I'm like, who does this man think he is? I told Corey, I'm like, too bad. We're going to date if we want to date. And then I got home, and it's like, I feel like I had to take a breath, because I just told my dad no for the first time in my life.
Wow, what a process.
Right.
So you were granted full custody. How long before the theology, the thought control, all of that started to melt away? Because I feel like you've been in survival mode this entire time, just trying to get out of these abusive situations. Now that your body is safe and you can just take a breath, like you said, are you starting to deconstruct all of this?
Yeah, it took years and years for me to, and I wouldn't even say that, I mean, I think it's a lifelong process for sure. It's probably since 2019, I did ayahuasca for the first time. And I feel like that's really where I can say that's when the most severance from some of that conditioning happened. But even all the way up until there, I feel like it's just a constant, I don't know that I need to deconstruct something until all of a sudden there it is.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, great. Now I get to do that. I had no idea that was still there. And so, yeah, I feel like it's been a process through the years.
What were your thoughts? So how long had you been out when because it was only 3 years ago that your dad became prophet. At what point in your journey did he become the prophet? And did that just completely throw you?
For me, no. The AUB, I always say this, they make up the rules as they go along. They change them all the time. But it's supposed to be very similar to the LDS church, where it's succession. Who's next in line? Mm-hmm. And so I knew that eventually my dad was going to be the prophet. But I don't think any of that never really settled with a lot of my siblings. They didn't understand a lot of that. So when he became the prophet, it wasn't very shocking to me. I know the way that things work, but a lot of my siblings don't. They went like completely out of religion. Out of the 34 children that I was raised with, there's only 4 that are still in the AUB.
Whoa.
The other 30 are gone, and none of my mom's children are. And so, in fact, they're so far removed from religion altogether that they have no idea about anything in the AUB. They don't know any of the doctrine. They don't know any of the procedures. They don't know any of that. So when my dad became the prophet, it shocked a lot of their systems. They didn't know what to do or how to react about it. And so then they were coming to me going, what in the hell just happened? And I did have a lot of conversations with my dad, like, Dad, just tell me honestly, what does the sound of God's voice sound like? And he's like, that's not funny. I'm like, I'm not trying to be funny. I like legitimately want to know. And he was like, oh my gosh, Melanie, that's not how it works. And so I would ask him these kind of questions because I want to know, like, if you really truly believe that you are the direct connection and the only person on the planet that has that direct connection, what is that like? What does that do? And I've had a fairly on and off relationship with my dad since I left the AUB. But then my little brother died about 1.5 years ago. And I took a step back from my dad for the way he handled the death. So I haven't had a lot to do with my dad in the last 1.5 years. But up until then, I did. I talked to him fairly regularly. He'd stay at my house quite often. And so I did have somewhat of a relationship with him. So yeah, I could ask him those questions that he thought were disrespectful, but I was genuinely curious. If you really truly believe this, then tell me what it means. Most of the other kids, he won't have those conversations with. He won't talk to them about that kind of stuff. But my current husband, is very well educated on the doctrines of Mormonism, on the doctrines of, polygamy. He's extremely well educated on that. And so I wouldn't say that I'm extremely well educated on it as much as he is, but enough to carry a conversation with my dad about things. So we did have some of those types of conversations, but he just thought I was being disrespectful to the process.
So you did repair the relationship. I mean, you said that he stayed the night even, and you were comfortable with that.
Yeah. So my parents, they ended up moving about 2 hours away from Salt Lake. They bought like what I refer to as a little compound.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad put all of his wives on that little compound. So sometimes they'd come up to Salt Lake to stay, and they would stay with there's 3 of us girls that he would stay with. And so, yeah, he would stay here. I have really created a home that most of my siblings have felt like it was their home. It's like the home base where my siblings will all come to, even my extended siblings from other mothers. And in fact, on Easter, just on Sunday, a huge chunk of all my siblings came over for Easter, and we barbecued. And because I am one of the oldest, I'm my mother's oldest. I'm my dad's 3rd oldest biological child, but I'm my mother's oldest child. I have a brother 18 months older and a sister 4 months older. And then I have another sister 4 hours older. Her mom married our dad when we were 4. So she's not biological. So yeah, a lot of them came over for Easter. My house has been like the parent home, I guess, is how if you'd want to say it. So my dad likes me. I do a lot of family events here, and my dad always wants to be here for those events. He has a sincere, deep fear of FOMO, and he hates being left out. I create a lot of these events that he comes and stays here for them, but not anymore.
Okay.
Now he won't come because now I've started calling his church a cult, and he really struggles with that.
Well, that would make him the cult leader.
Right. All of the other things that I say on my YouTube channel, that's the one that really gets him, is that I call his church a cult.
So I have to have you talk about your best friend, because I know this little tidbit and I think it's very interesting.
That was really hard for me. And the thing is, I still love her and adore her. I don't really have a relationship with her anymore. She's the one who introduced me to my current husband. She was married to my husband's brother. So she was married to my brother-in-law, and she was the one who introduced me. So growing up in the AUB, I mean, there's a lot of members, you don't always know each other. And so I didn't know my current husband growing up until after I had left. And I became best friends with her when I was 16. And she's a little bit older than me. So she was 19, I was 16, and she was pregnant with her 2nd child when we became friends. All her kids call me aunt. And so one day my dad comes up here to stay with one of his other wives, and he's staying at my house, and he's like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm going to get married again." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It'd been a really long time since he'd gotten married, 20 years. And he's like, "And I just wanted to let you know that she is older than my oldest child." And I was like, "Oh shit, this isn't going to go good." And so, and then he tells me who she is, and I'm like, "Wait, my friend?" So yeah, that was a really hard pill to swallow that night. I was stunned. Ooh. Even my husband was stunned, because he's like, "Wait, my sister-in-law? That's who you're marrying?" My brother-in-law left the AUB and wanted his wives to come with him, but they still wanted to stay in the AUB. Only one wife went with him. And so the other 2 wives stayed in the AUB, and they were remarried. We call them recycled. They were recycled into new marriages. And so my dad was one of them that got married to her. So that's been really interesting. I went to the wedding reception. It's hard because I still love her, and I want to try to talk about her with respect. And at the same time, it feels really weird. It's really, even her children were like, "Do we call you Aunt Mel still? Or do we call, like, what do we do?" And so, it's been a tricky way to navigate. And so really, we just don't even communicate anymore. We really don't have any relationship at all anymore. And not that I wouldn't, it's just, it's hard. It's like, what do you say? What do you do? Like, now you're married to my dad. What are you thinking? Like, are you crazy? And so.
Yeah. Was he a prophet at that time?
Mm-hmm. And how does she say no to the prophet?
Yeah, it was probably an honor.
Exactly. So because I understand where her mentality is still in the cult, I understand why she wouldn't do it. And at the same time, I'm like, it's so hard for me to wrap my brain around sometimes.
Yeah, I completely understand that it's a tricky place to be in, because on one hand, you know exactly where she's coming from because you've been in it. You've been in that mindset. We already talked about how you looked back at yourself in that mindset and thought, what was I thinking? So I can totally understand how that's a really weird place to be in. And also acknowledging and honoring your feelings of feeling really awkward and uncomfortable that your best friend has married your dad. I think that's a very valid place to be.
Yeah. It's definitely one of the trickiest things I think I've had to navigate through just being a part of it, this whole entire religion completely. I never thought I would ever be at a point where I would have to acknowledge something like that.
Yeah, the age difference alone. And also, your dad and how he treats people. You saw how he treated your mom, and it probably makes you feel, not great that he is now married to your best friend. Is she expected to have his children?
I think she's past having children, but she did have an 11-year-old at the time. And they've been married now for three years, maybe 4. And about 3 years. And yeah, my heart has been hurt for that little girl. I've heard some of the stories, and it has been really hard to know what that little girl's going through. And, my mom had his youngest child before that. And just watching even my little sister navigate through that, because my dad takes a lot of pride in, this is my baby girl. And, my dad's always taken a lot of pride in his girls, because that's what these men do. These women are objects. And here you go, look at this, this is my pride and joy of my baby girl. And now that he's got this new wife with this little one, she is now his baby girl. And that has been really hard on my sister, who now no longer has a relationship with my dad at all. And, when my brother passed not too long ago, my friend had come to the funeral with her daughter. And I wasn't sure how my little sister was going to handle it. And she handled it with so much grace and so much love. And and I said to her, "How are you doing? Are you okay?" And she was like, "It's not her fault that her mom and dad did this. Like, this isn't her fault. It's not her fault but before she was so angry, and she's like, I feel feelings of anger and hate towards a little girl I've never even met before. And it's not even her fault." And so I wasn't sure how she was going to handle the meeting, but she handled it with, she squatted down, got on her level, talked to her, hugged her, told her how beautiful she was. And then I just held her for a while after the interaction was over. Then I just held my little sister for a while. I'm like, "Are you okay?" And here we were already dealing with the grief of losing our brother. And it was a moment for sure. Oh, yeah. And I don't think my dad realizes, I talked to my dad later, and I was like, how do you do this to her? Like, she's been your baby girl. She's 20. My little sister's 20 now. She's older. Well, now she's 24, but yeah, I was just like, "Dad, you can't do this to her." And I tried to explain to him, and he just didn't see it. He's like, "Well, sorry, she's my baby now too." And it was just like so disregarding. And that's just how so many of us girls are treated in this religion. We're just, our feelings, our emotions, our needs, our wants, everything is just disregarded as, "Oh, well, get over it." So it's been really, it's been one of the harder things to watch her navigate through that, and then me navigate through it with being as respectful to my friend as I can. It's one of the most off the wall weird things I think I've never realized I'd ever have to deal with. So yeah. And I literally have not talked about it publicly, because it's one of those things where I don't want to be hurtful. And then at the same time, I want to scream, "What in the F?" What are you thinking?
Yeah, that's a lot. How have you been able to handle your emotions now? So you've been out for a while. Do you still have a hard time with feeling your emotions or feeling like you're being heard?
Actually, I feel like I've healed on so many levels. I am a completely different person now. In fact, more people come to me than not when they need help with things. And I'm like, "I'm not a therapist, guys. I just play one on TV." I'm like, really not a therapist. And so I talk to a lot of my siblings, being one of the oldest. My older brother and sister, their mom left our dad when we were really small, 2 and 3 years old. So they were never raised with us. So in a lot of respects, I am the oldest, and I am the fourth oldest grandchild out of the 350. I really am just right there at the top. And so I've had to work and navigate through a lot of that with my siblings, and even with my cousins. Just the amount of therapy. I feel like I'm always in therapy. There's not really a year that goes by that I don't do something. I am very vocal now. There's not very many things I won't talk about now. I can't think of one thing that I wouldn't talk about now, other than this, my friend marrying my dad. I've been hesitant to talk about that online just because I want to be respectful to her. But I knew eventually I was going to. It's just when and where. I feel like I am in a completely different state of mind. I don't even recognize who I used to be at all. If I can advocate for other women coming out of these situations, then I will do everything I can to advocate for those women. I literally, since I started up my YouTube channel, have had dozens and dozens of women reach out to me that are currently still in the AUB that want to leave, that don't know how to leave,
Wow.
or those that are just even in just other different types of cults. I've had them reach out and just, thank you so much. Let's talk about this. And so I've tried to be as supportive as I can to as many of them as I can. And again, I'm not a therapist, but I can do the best I can and then point them in the right direction of somebody who can help them.
What is your main advice for someone who's in the AUB trying to leave?
That you will survive. One of the things I tell so many people that I talk to, I know that you don't feel like you can breathe in this 30 seconds, but in the next 30 seconds, you're going to be able to breathe. And the next 30 seconds, it's going to get a little easier. And if you have to take life 30 seconds at a time, do it. It's almost like that scenario where they say, can you eat a whole elephant? When I first heard that, absolutely not. No way. But then oh yeah, you can, bite by bite. And that's kind of how it is deconstructing religion. It's bite by bite. It's minute by minute. Sometimes it's 30 seconds by 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And when you think that the world is just crumbling around you, take a breath, sit back. And one of the biggest things I always recommend to people, make a list. Just 2 things, 3 things, 5 things that you can be grateful for. Even if you don't believe them, could you possibly be grateful for them? If you don't believe them right now in this moment, is there a part of you that could be grateful for that once or later? So I'm always telling people that was how I found myself out of that hole, was creating gratitude for the things that I do have, because it's so easy to get lost in all of the things that you don't have. I don't have a high school diploma. I didn't get my high school diploma till I was 25. It's like, I don't have an education. I don't have this. I don't have this. So you get wrapped up in all of these I don't haves. How do I get out? Mm-hmm. So when you can stop and take away that part of it and look at what abilities do you have? You know what? I can be grateful that I have 3 kids. I can be grateful that I know how to cook. Even if it's like, oh, cooking is bullshit, I hate it. You know what I mean? But you can still know that it's a skill that you have. So that's really the biggest thing that I try to tell people. Yeah. Do this daily until you really do start to believe it, and you'll see your paradigm of life shift. You'll look at life differently. But when you look at life from fear, shame, and guilt, that's all you see is fear, shame, and guilt. But when you can slowly start to turn that focus somewhere else, the fear starts to subside, the guilt starts to subside, and the shame starts to go away. When I find myself deep in some of that, that's where I always go back to. What can I be grateful for? How can I find a center in gratitude? And then my perspective shifts.
While also holding space for those bigger negative feelings too.
Right.
And that's so true. Gratitude is such a beautiful thing. And I feel like it brings more abundance when we have those feelings of gratefulness, and at the same time acknowledging the hard things. And if you're angry, feeling angry and allowing yourself to feel through that as well, I think is so important in combination.
Yeah, I've had a really angry week. So it's been really rough week for me. I've had a lot of anger towards my parents. I've had a lot of anger, especially towards my dad this week. And some fiery tears have been happening this week. And I've been slowly processing through some of that. And I feel like it's just, I did a lot of research on people's brains when they come out of cults. And they are literally damaged to a point that is almost unrepairable. But you can heal some of, you're just wired different, and you always will be. And as long as you go into that knowing I will always be wired a little differently than an average person who didn't have to go through some of these levels of abuse, then you can know that when you have something trigger you, you don't stay in the shame and the guilt about it, because you know that, you know what, there's a way for me to get out of this. I don't have to be shamed and guilted forever. And when you understand that, you don't feel so different. You don't feel so odd. You don't feel like I'm broken all the time. And that I
Yeah.
felt that way for years, that I was broken. And it was just because, I was broken in the polygamous church because I wasn't following all the rules and wasn't doing all the things. I was broken in the real world because I didn't even have an education. I didn't even know what I was going to do to support 3 children on my own. And I just had to do it. I just had to figure it out. 3 jobs I worked, and I just took it sometimes 30 seconds at a time.
Yeah, wouldn't you say that resorting emotions is probably one of the hardest parts of leaving a religion? Because you brought up a good point of shame and guilt are the main emotions when you're in these high control groups, and fear.
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to ignore all the other ones, ignore anger, ignore sadness, ignore any of those other emotions that aren't, quote, serving you as far as the religion goes. And so when you leave, you have to learn how to bring the volume down on the shame, guilt, and fear, bring the volume up on allowing yourself to be angry or sad or even happy, because I feel like my happiness was kind of dulled in some ways. Don't be vain, Shalise. Don't
Right.
be vain. Be humble. Be humble. And so you're not even allowing yourself to feel pride for yourself. And so recalibrating emotions was probably the hardest thing for me. And I've noticed a lot for our guests too, is just figuring out where those fit.
Right. I felt guilty for the longest time if I felt a level of happiness.
Yeah.
If I just felt a level of peace where it's like I'm just sitting on the couch and I don't have a list of 500 things that I need to do, I felt guilt about that. And my baby just turned 18 and I'm sitting here. Well, now what do? I need a list of 100 things because I'm constantly always I need to be in service, or I need to be working, or I need to be doing something. And I felt a lot of guilt around just finding peace and happiness. That's been an adjustment for me recently. I felt like I was already worked through a lot of that shame and guilt around peace and happiness. And when I'm angry, I express a lot of, healthy. I work on doing healthy ways of expressing the frustration and anger that I go through. But now I'm at a different level when my baby turned 18 in February, and I'm like, wait, what? And so much of the programming is now coming back of like, well, I still need to be busy. So now what am I going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's not just an AUB thing. That is Mormonism. I feel like all of
For
us
sure.
were taught, idle hands are the devil's playground. So
Playground.
Yep. So you have to.
Yep. We're bringing my mom back on again to talk about motherhood, growing up in a high control religion, and how I've experienced motherhood out of a high control religion. We're going to do like comparing notes thing, because I think it's so valuable to talk about the woman's experience, especially through the lens of a mother and all of the expectations that are
Right.
placed and the perfectionism and all of that. But story for another day. How are you doing now? What is your joy and your happiness, the things that bring you peace?
I've been reading a lot because now I have so much time on my hands. It's crazy. I have grandbabies that I absolutely just adore, and I spend a lot of time with them. My oldest one is 5.5. And when she was born, I literally felt this like energy come over me, like a wave of energy that came at me the first time I saw her. And I felt like I had such a huge responsibility, because I was still in a hurtful, broken place in so many ways when I was raising my children. And now I understand that concept, it takes a village to raise children. And I feel such a responsibility now that I've been so much more healed than I was back then, to show up for her in a way that is, I have 2 granddaughters now too, show up for them in ways that are healthy. And so I feel like it's this constant work all the time of, I got into plant medicines, which that's a whole different other story, to heal different levels of trauma that I didn't even realize were still in my programming. And so, yeah, I feel like it's a constant thing, but those 2 are like the light of my entire life. I love hanging out with them. I have a daughter who just moved to North Carolina. We've been going back and forth playing, seeing her. And honestly, I have never just had alone time with my husband. And so we're going to be traveling and doing some things. When we got married, we didn't even do a honeymoon. We took my children, because I had 3 children, on a 2-week road trip. So we didn't even do a honeymoon. And in the 25 years we've been together, we have done maybe 3 trips alone. So we're going to start traveling a lot more. I feel like traveling is one of the best ways to heal some of the trauma that goes on in your brain. Seeing different cultures, seeing different people, seeing different parts of the world is such a positive way to heal some of the trauma that you have from high controlled religions.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful way to drop you into a whole different environment because, you know, leaving cults, getting yourself out of that environment is so key. If you're not able to, at least mentally removing yourself. But even further, like you said, that's such a great point. Dropping into other cultures completely, being immersed and seeing how other people live and interact is such a beautiful way to continue to expand your mind and your experiences and your perceptions of the world too. That's such a helpful thing. Well, this has been so awesome. I just need your Linda listen moment.
Oh my gosh. I thought about that this morning. And honestly, it's like, oh gosh, I'm so stunned on this one. I would say, honestly, Linda, listen, find the good things in your life. Focus on the good things. Find the things that you can be grateful for and count them. You know, count them daily if you need to. Count them by minutes if you need to. Those would be the biggest things.
I love it. Thank you so much, Melanie. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
I know. When I decided to reach out to you, I always swore I would never reach out to anyone. I'm like, if they want to talk to me, they'll reach out to me. But then I watched one of your panels with you had 8 of you on their panel. And I was like, oh, that is what I would love to do. And then I watched your one where you had a couple of women on talking about general conferences. And I felt it felt so empowering that I was like, you know, I'm just going to reach out to her and connect with like-minded women who want to advocate for other women. And so I've really appreciated watching your channel. I'm new to your channel. I haven't done a lot of YouTube on other situations. So yours is one of mine that I've been binging lately.
Oh,
and
awesome.
Yeah, I've really, really appreciated just the positive things that you talk about. And I feel like we can all beat all of this stuff down and talk about all the hard things. And then there's always a way to talk about the empowering things. How do we empower each other, especially as women? So I've really appreciated that part of your show too.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the rabbit hole. If it gets a little too much, like take care of your mental health, because I know it can be a lot to listen to other people's traumas, especially when it mirrors our own. But yes, everyone who comes on is so inspirational in their own way. And it's so beautiful to see the consciousness side of their story and how they've pulled themselves out of it or how they're still working on pulling themselves out of it. It's really awesome. And it's an honor for me that people are willing to share their story. So that goes for you as well.
Thanks.
Thank you for coming on and being so vulnerable and raw with us. We really appreciate it. I'm sure our audience does too.
Absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Any other final thoughts?
No, just thank you. Thank you for taking the time to hear it. You know, I appreciate that.
Of course. So guys, if you're still listening, leave those words of encouragement down below for Melanie. Go check out her channel. The link is in the description. It's Notes to Self 444. Do you have social media that you want people to follow?
I do have everything's connected to my YouTube page. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. Those are my main channels.
Okay, perfect. We'll put those links in the description as well. The best way to support the channel, guys, is to interact with it. Even just leaving an emoji is a great way to tell the algorithm that you like the video and you want others to see it. Of course, sharing, subscribing, becoming a supporter, it means a lot to us as well. And if you want to support further, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/cults2consciousness. You can get some merch, like we mentioned. I'm sorry for what I said when I was in a cult t-shirt is over at cults2consciousness.com under the merch tab. And we're going to Mexico at the end of the year. If you would like to join us, the itinerary, the link is in the description too. And if you like this video, I'll link a few more down here for you to check out. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.